Don't settle for bad socks. Get comfort and grip at an affordable price with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Choose from 18 different colors at puregripsocks.com.
2024 has been an amazing year for speed boots, and I'm not just talking about the most expensive high-end ones, but even mid-level and lower budget options offer some really good value for money. But can Puma keep up with competitive offerings from both Nike and Adidas? Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new Puma Ultra 5 Pro, the first takedown model in the new Ultra lineup, bearing a retail price of $140, which is not only way less expensive than what you'll find from the top-end Ultra models at $230 and $290, but they're also less expensive than the Adidas and Nike alternatives in the Vapor 16 Pro at $160 and the F50 Pro at $150. And for those familiar with the $230 Ultra 5 Ultimate, what I think is arguably the best speed boot of the year, the Ultra 5 Pro in a lot of ways is a copy and paste of that football boot, but for $90 less. Sound too good to be true? Well, that's because it sort of is, because for as many amazing high-end football boot qualities that these share with the more expensive Ultra 5 Ultimate, there is one fatal flaw that, particularly for a speed boot, might turn a lot of people off the Ultra 5 Pro. We're going to discuss exactly what that flaw is as we talk about the good and bad of the Ultra 5 Pro, including how they fit and feel on feet, and then ultimately concluding whether or not these are up to par with really what has been a high bar set by Nike and Adidas when it comes to mid-level takedown model speed boots. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around and watch the entire review. And if you are interested in a pair for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the first link down below. And as always, if you enjoy the unsugar-coated, brutally honest reviews on this channel, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. So first things first, let's not beat around the bush. What exactly is the fatal flaw of the Ultra 5 Pro? Well, it's not that they don't perform well, it's not that they don't fit well, it's the fact that for a pair of speed boots, even at $140, they're just not that light. If we compare the Ultra Pro to what is the lightest variant in the Ultra 5 lineup in the regular Ultimate, actually 10 grams lighter than the carbon version, believe it or not, both in the same size, 9.5 US. We'll start off with the high-end model. You can see that they weigh in at a relatively lightweight 7.3 ounces, the equivalent of 207 grams, on par with most high-end speed boots, if not a little bit heavier than some of the lighter ones that are out there. And then if we look at the Ultra 5 Pro, you can see that they weigh in at 8.9 ounces, the equivalent of 252 grams. That's a 45 gram weight difference going from being one of the lighter boots on the market to one of the heavier ones, despite effectively looking almost exactly the same. And that's not to say that an extra 45 grams is going to slow you down, but certainly when compared to the high-end model, or even when compared to something like the $160 Vapor 16 Pro from Nike, those are actually 47 grams lighter than these in the same size. So if you're after that super lightweight speed boot feel, despite fitting like a pair of high-end speed boots, the feel, because of that extra weight, isn't necessarily there. If you really don't care about having super light boots, I suppose this is a non-issue, but given how light the competition is at the same price point, and really how light modern football boots in general have become, this is a bit of a confusing one, and there's no other way to say it. It's a little bit disappointing considering how good everything else is. And it's at this point where you're probably asking yourself, if the upper is borderline identical to the top-end model, how on earth is it so much heavier? And that really comes down to the sole plate and stud pattern, specifically the construction of the sole plate, which I can only assume utilizes a different plastic in terms of what you can see on the outside. But internally, if we remove the insole, the actual sole plate construction internally is completely different, and obviously just a lot heavier. Where you're also probably asking yourself, why have they done this? And I can only assume it's to protect the integrity of that top end model and have some separation from the takedown version. I don't see how this type of construction would lend itself to being less expensive on Puma's end, given that the retail price of this boot is so much less. It really does come across, in my opinion, as making them heavier for the sake of just making them less desirable than the high-end model, which is a bit of a shame, but at the same time, I kind of understand why they've done it. But also when you consider how close in weight the Nike and Adidas first takedown models in their speed lines are compared to their top-end elite ones, it does seem a little bit unnecessary. Despite the extra weight though, the actual feel of the sole plate isn't that different from the Ultra 5 Ultimate. It's maybe a little bit thicker underfoot in terms of what you can feel, but in terms of flexibility and just general responsiveness, I don't think it's that different. You will also notice that you don't get the mini external heel counter like the Ultra 5 Ultimate. Instead, you get an internal one, relating this maybe a little bit more closely in terms of shaping and fit through the heel area to that $290 Ultra 5 Carbon, which sounds like a good thing, but once again, I did find the external heel counter to allow for a little bit of a softer feel internally to the heel on that Ultra 5 Ultimate, which is why I found it slightly more comfortable than the Carbon variation. The same thing goes for the Ultra 5 Pro. They're not uncomfortable, but they're a little bit stiffer and just firmer through the back of the heel, especially internally, than I would personally like them to be. But we'll talk about that more a little bit later during the on-feet portion of the video. But it's really the stud pattern where I think there's a major difference when you're comparing it to the higher end models, where you'll notice you still get those kind of three-sided bladed studs, 3 of them under the heel, very unique in terms of that setup, and you get a bunch of them scattered through the forefoot. But you'll also notice that they've basically thrown in some conical studs into the mix, where the placement of the studs remains the same, but along the outside, you're going to get rounded studs rather than bladed ones, which for this Puma Fast Track system that they're calling it, this being their FG layout, it just makes them a little bit less aggressive in terms of the bite they provide when changing direction. Is this better or worse? Again, I really think this kind of falls under personal preference, where if you don't like having too much grip, having a little bit more freedom to twist and pivot because of the rounded stud shape that you get in some areas of the foot here might actually be a little bit better for you. So it really is something to consider if you're a fan of the Ultra and maybe don't care too much about the weight. If you don't want too aggressive of a stud pattern from your speed boots, what you get here from the Ultra 5 Pro is effectively just that. Definitely a little less aggressive than the higher end models, but still fantastic. And then there's the upper, where as far as I can tell and as far as I can feel is just a direct copy and paste of the top end Ultra 5 Ultimate and Ultra 5 Carbon. It is a textile based, super thin synthetic material with tons of pliability, reinforced with power tape all the way through, and featuring their Grip Control Pro on the surface, giving this a little bit of a stickier feel than I think a lot of people would necessarily anticipate. Visually, there's only 2 giveaways that would let you know that this isn't an Ultra 5 Ultimate, or I guess technically 3. No heel counter. It laces up slightly different at the very bottom lacing position, and the Puma form stripe here on the lateral side is just printed on the surface of the upper rather than being a stick-on additional piece, which actually makes for slightly more consistent grip as well as less bulk on the surface because it's just paint rather than actual plastic. In other words, for $140, you're effectively getting an elite level speed boot upper, giving you that raw barefoot feel with really no extra padding whatsoever, meaning that you're also not getting anything in the way of protection. But if you're looking for maximum ball feel, this is a fantastic upper. It's pliable, it has nice structure, and the Grip Control Pro on the surface, while not maybe as extreme as the grip knit material you'll find on the elite level Mercurials, it does give you that additional grip that most other football boots this thin won't necessarily provide. You're also getting a nice deep central lacing system, which allows for great adjustability, with of course a one-piece upper construction, with that central portion of the upper being filled in with an elasticated knit material that of course flows into a standard low cut design. We have an internal heel lining material made from a really soft microfiber padding targeted more towards the upper part of the heel liner, where at the very base, you're basically just right up against the plastic, which isn't my cup of tea. Again, very similar to that of the Ultra 5 Carbon. And then the insole fully removable, pretty well identical to what you're gonna find on the high-end model in terms of having that nano grip liner on the surface, which has a little bit of a soft silicone texture, maybe not as extreme as we used to see in the past, but still pretty decent. And it's made from a single layer of this thin white foam with a perforated insert running through the forefoot, which truthfully isn't really anything special, but it is more than you'll get from most football boots at this price point. On feet, despite the extra weight, the Ultra 5 Pro feels very similar to both the Ultimate and the Carbon versions that sit above it. Obviously, in terms of sole plate feel, this is much more flexible, like the plastic sole plate of the Ultimate, where it's a little bit thicker underfoot, but truthfully, the overall feel of it when running around is pretty well identical. And then through the heel, because of the lack of external heel counter, the construction and general fit is very similar to that of the $290 Ultra Carbon, which basically means there's just a little bit less padding at the very low point at the back of the heel liner, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just has a little bit more of that firmer feel. Not my preference. I find the Ultra 5 Ultimate to be the most comfortable through the rear out of all the new Ultra models, but I can't say that I had any issues with discomfort or blistering. The shaping of the boot is also pretty well identical as what you're going to find from the higher end models. Once you tie the laces tight, it wraps your foot very nicely, and compared to the past couple generations of Puma Ultra speed boots in general, they've done a very good job, and if anything, they fit very Mercurial-esque in a lot of ways in terms of wrapping your foot very closely, having a lower volume fit overall, but also maybe have a little bit of extra width that the Mercurials don't necessarily have. Very comfortable considering how thin and not padded this upper actually is. From a width perspective, obviously if you don't like tight-fitting football boots, the speed category in general is typically not a good idea. These would be no different. I wouldn't necessarily recommend them for somebody with exceptionally wide feet, but if you like a tight-fitting boot, I think there's enough width where these will work for most people. And as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in the same size 9.5 US as I wear in the other models, and they fit a smidge shorter. I wouldn't necessarily say a full half size. It's maybe a quarter size, if anything. Not enough for me to necessarily justify going up in size, but if you're wearing your boots right now and you're finding them a little bit snug, going a half size up wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea in the Ultra 5 Pro. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. They run a touch shorter than the higher end models, but for most people, I do think going true to size will work out best. So in conclusion, the Puma Ultra 5 Pro at $140 is a mid-level price point speed boot that offers high-end speed boot fit and performance characteristics without high-end speed boot feel, because simply put, they're not very light. Where, like I said earlier, if you don't really care about weight, or perhaps just prefer a football boot that weighs a little bit more, don't waste your money on the higher end Puma Ultra models. Go for the Ultra 5 Pro at 140 bucks. It offers very similar performance. But if the lightweight feel, which I would argue is a huge part of the high-end speed boot experience, is important to you, then I'm not so sure that the Ultra 5 Pro, for as many positive qualities as it has, is necessarily the better choice over the much lighter and also very good Adidas F50 Pro and Nike Mercurial Vapor 16 Pro.